Good day. Yes, my name is Indrek Ibrus. I'm a professor of media innovation at Tallinn University and its film and television school. So most of my talk today will be more or less based on everything audiovisual. It's based on my own recent and ongoing studies when it comes to the datafication of the audiovisual culture of film and television and other forms of audiovisual culture. And so this is just a kind of disclaimer here that this is my focus. I feel sometimes a little bit here as bringing coal to Newcastle, because you are all very good experts on metadata and such. I am a researcher of metadata as well, but as I am mainly a media scholar, so in many ways I'm still a learner in this area. But as I said, my talk is based on our ongoing multi-year project that is titled as Public Value of Cultural Open Data Systems. That is only started. It had a kind of vague beginning, so it's approximately 1.5 years old, and we will go on for another 4.5 years. So it's a long-term project. And you're all welcome to check out what we are doing, what we have been doing and will be doing on this website that you see on your screens. So, and as you saw on the title, I will be focusing on the Web 3.0. But firstly, of course, these are all in many ways kind of marketing slogans or kind of used to put the focus on certain phenomena or processes when it comes to new media technologies or kind of possibilities that these could enable, or maybe potentials of market restructurations of various kinds. But of course, these kinds of slogans, these kinds of denominators effectively relate to each other. And of course, they contrast each other. And of course, you may all well know that we have had, so to speak, Web 2.0 for more than a decade, 15 years or something. And we all remember the promise that we were, with the arrival of various network software protocols that enabled more of participation, of user-drivenness, of immediacy when it comes to interacting with the web, much more multimodal forms, etc. These were celebrated something like a dozen years ago, the arrival of users being really to be in control when they interact with the web-based media. However, the argument goes, or what we learned maybe with some more clarity a few years ago, that what we instead got was that all our steps, our interactions with the internet were in various ways datafied. The data about these interactions, what we do on the internet, data was collected. This translated into various forms of, so to speak, surveillance. Datafication led to platformization phenomena, so who were organizations, institutions that were able to hoard the data about our interactions of our web behavior, got advantages in the internet economy. This led to the ever-growing growth, or growth in terms of power and capacities of those platforms, and then different kinds of new business models that are built not so much of value creation, as some critics are saying, but more just on value extraction based on the data they have collected about us. So this is what the criticism says, and there's not much I can disagree with that. Now, next to it now, in the recent years, or maybe more than a dozen years in some sense, we had another nominator here, Web 3.0. You here all know, usually I need to explain this story, is that, of course, first it was used to describe the new potential of the internet, the emergence of the, so to speak, semantic web, computer-readable web, where all relations are described semantically and the relationships are understood by all kinds of computers, and hence our data structures are more better understandable for computers, and hence you could effectively do more of that data in terms of building new kinds of products and services. Semantic web could be argued that emerged as a kind of top-down idea. It was the idea of Tim Berners-Lee, came down straight from a standardization body, W3C. Now, you may also know that in the last few years, blockchains have kind of stolen that term, that nominator, Web 3.0. They claim to be the new constitute the new generation of the internet. And here one could argue that blockchains have definitely emerged out of the periphery of the culture and society. Has been kind of a bottom-up process. Of course, this can be disputed in various ways because a lot of wealth has been also acquired or created by those who have been developing those main blockchain networks. But okay, so now this was an introduction, so now to my own research. The project that we are running kind of tries to explore the potentials of both of these technologies that are argued to be the constitutes little bit to an extent the next generation of the internet. Our aim was to understand how they could create, or maybe they are not doing that, create more public value. So, and this now builds on the research that I actually have been carrying out before my current project since 2017. And it's still partly ongoing in a sense that some of the main papers I still haven't time to write down the ideas, and I actually plan to do it in this upcoming summer. Anyway, the first focus of that previous research was firstly the little backstory is that I used to work as an advisor to the Ministry of Culture here on audiovisual culture, audiovisual industries, and we were organizing the digitization of Estonian film heritage and television heritage, and gradually I grew into the knowledge that you all certainly have, the importance of metadata. In the media studies, we typically day in, day out tend to criticize and problematize algorithms, how they are problematic. But you know, this kind of knowledge that occurred to me was that at least for now, all those algorithms are interacting with various kinds of metadata schemas, and hence what we as consumers get as we try to access audiovisual heritage, try to build our societal audiovisual culture memories, memory systems, really depend on the nature of the metadata. So my first interest was firstly, where is this metadata coming from? From what kind of industry dynamics? Who standardizes those things? And why do they develop certain kinds of metadata standards? I have a history also in standardization. Standardization studies. My PhD was about standardization of the web, of the mobile web standards. And my second focus is, okay, we are having and are getting certain kinds of audiovisual metadata standards, audiovisual culture metadata standards. So how do these affect what are we getting as consumers and citizens, and how these could really affect the cultural memory systems sort of out there. Now, many years of studies. I'm not going to go. We don't have time for the methodologies and what did I do. I can tell you that I interviewed about 50 people representing all the major audiovisual culture databases, platforms in Europe and in Northern America, not outside of these regions. And so this is where I arrived at. So firstly, what drives really the datafication or standardization of audiovisual culture metadata systems? There are three types of organizations that tend to behave a little bit differently or are distinct subsystems. Firstly, film archives the problem for them is that there are always lots of different versions of film. As consumers, we tend to not to be aware of that, but there's always some adaptation to target markets when films are traveling, etc. And of course, there are a lot of paratexts, scripts, posters, reception articles, a lot of information about filmmakers, actors, etc. So there's a lot of complexity that the archives really need to store and preserve about each film when it comes to the digital versions of things. And secondly, as Europe's film archives are, typically public institutions. They are typically poorly funded. So the problem that they systematically face is that they are dependent on various kinds of proprietary database systems that are difficult to change when the need comes, that are difficult to open up, where from it is difficult to get data out, even if one tries to carry out some more complex data analytic exercises. And secondly, and one way, and film archives are very interested in interacting with each other, sharing data, because they tend to hold or they need to interlink films that are actually interlinked. Information about filmmakers, co-produced films, films that have traveled and ended up in certain new archives. So they are very interested in sharing data, pulling data from each other, etc. So this is what they are interested in. And also in the national context, increasingly to link up with other databases such as libraries, perhaps even museums. So what has emerged in this context is that problematization of relational databases and increasingly finding value in linked data sets. So I'm going to come back to that, but one of the drivers in European context is the Cinémathèque, the Belgian Royal Film Archive, that has been driving this movement, and many of the film archives these days are learning from the Belgians. Okay. So what is now the broadcasters? So broadcasters are institutions that need to put out tons of content every day. So the archives typically there are in a service function. They service the on-air, what to put on there, production of new content day in, day out. But of course the problematic, or I don't know, also a value emerged something like a decade ago when these broadcasting institutions did not only start put out content in the linear broadcasting format, but increasingly on the web. So the outcome of that, and they are long-term legacy organizations as well. So they have different sub-archives, radio, television news, stuff that has been on the web, and so on and so forth. So there are different kinds of legacy metadata schemas, legacy sub-archives that are typically running in-house. So there's a complexity when it comes to that. And so they too, some years ago, started increasingly to find that this complexity needs to be reduced. Their in-house operations need to be better standardized. And so the way to do it is to go over to the linked data format. So EBU, European Broadcasting Union, developed a new version of the EBU core schema that already 4 years now has also been based on the RDF. So and the whole kind of the broadcasting institution that have implemented that standard, this as is their life, because basically they are running one. It's never ideally so, but let's just idealize the processes a little bit in these organizations that effectively they are having one big linked data sets where they can choose then in which format they are putting content out for different kinds of output channels or platforms. Yes. And EBU core has been influential in other way as well, which is that here EBU is not, of course, the European Union organization, But in some sense, globally, its effect has been what typically EU is having, that there is very effective in standardization. So increasingly we see that in the US context, organizations such as HBO or other TV organizations in the US are simply taking over that European standard and are building on that. And yes, okay. And here comes my next slide, which is those global big platforms, VOD platforms, or platforms that are selling films in various ways. So Apple Store, Apple TV, Google Play, Netflix, YouTube, and so on. Sorry, wrong button. Yeah, I need to learn the buttons. Okay, so we tend to talk about these kinds of platforms, these organizations, that they must be really effective with their data handling. They must be very clever collecting data about us and all the, let's say, content they are having on the platforms. I can tell you that this is actually not the case. Film industry and television industry is struggling a lot when it comes to their international export strategies, interacting with platforms. Very often it's just about exchanging Excel files. Because again, these different organizations use different schemas. International standards for that kind of data exchange has not been developed. And so increasingly, and here also, pandemic had a lot of effect because people couldn't travel. People needed to, also, in film industry in general, needed to, when it comes to their production processes, when they commission work, and increasingly film industry is operating, very much internationally. The work is being commissioned across the world all the time, and so they need to standardize also the production processes. And here again, we see that I've been talking a lot to an institution called Movie Labs, which is the Hollywood NGO for their standardization processes, that they have been, yes, partly learning from these European standards and have been working towards all kinds of linked data formats when it comes to linking different data sets for sharing data, metadata, as well as starting from the ground up, starting from the already production processes. And now the recent standard they developed was also for harvesting reception data. So platforms such as Rotten Tomatoes and such, or other where reception information can be gathered to collect that data also internationally systematically in the RDF format. So what are we having here? We see that very different kinds of organizations, for a little bit different reasons, have been gradually moving towards that, building on the original semantic web idea, because they see that they can run their operations more effectively if they can link to other data sets, standardize data about films. It makes the processes more effective, makes the processes more cheaper, and yeah, so we see the very kind of rational motivations here. And we also see public and private institutions collaborating. Public kinds of organizations in European context developing standards, and private organizations across the world building on top of those. So this kind of public-private mesh of standards and technologies. So, and here the kind of contextual, what needs to be said is that we, in the sort of media industry talk, this whole semantic web aspect has been disregarded for a long while. The typical argument that semantic web didn't happen. But here, in the context of the film archives, or other audiovisual culture institutions, we see that kind of under the hood, it has been constantly evolving, and it's sort of getting there, now-ish. So when it comes to that, my little bit older work, which is only a couple of years old, We also theorized this kind of emergence of the everything linked, and the kind of the argument, of course, in the context of developing metadata for heritage, is that we need to kind of preserve. Yeah, we need to stabilize the data systems. They need to be authentic. They need to be well grounded, truthful, etc., etc. And to be honest, this is also the kind of concern that we as theorists in the university have had for a long while, in a sense that are we maybe stabilizing these systems for too much? If the meanings of films, of everything in the culture, what constitutes cultural memory, actually change, then how easily can we change those data systems about those? Are we fixing culture? But actually, in that article, we have other articles as well where we analyzed, in a way, how can the audiovisual culture metadata be used for analysis, how kind of truthful it is in a way, or how much it kind of twists and tweaks. But here we say that actually, in many ways, and I'm not going to go into detail into these theoretical arguments here, the challenge is that with the linked data, that when anybody can add data, links. And this is also what tends to happen in all those audiovisual archives. People are adding more films, adding more links. In the commercial databases, there is also the user data. Of course, there is more of user data being added to those, users having context. So the items in these archives their meanings and their semantic context tend to change. And so we made an argument that in many ways, these web-based archives are not systems of fixing or stabilizations, but could be also argued to be the hotspots of creativity in the contemporary digital culture, because they make new links, they constantly establish new links, and hence new constantly changing meaning contexts for anything in the internet, in those databases, and hence they are kind of completely unpredictable hotspots of creativity. Now going more in detail to this was all background that we already in a way know. Now going into our existing research, this actually sub-project hasn't even started, but we kind of will commence with that hopefully in a few months. But as I already mentioned, that the Royal Film Archives of Belgium, Cinematheque, has been one of the drivers of that linked data movement in the film archive context in Europe and globally. And what is also interesting is, of course, they have been very explicit that one of their, as I already told, goals is, or the aims is to cut the costs and share resources linked to other film data sets in other film archives, so to speak. But they also are already agreed with Wikidata to share their data and link up, which again means that what we are getting here is this building of the broader linked data system. And especially as we all now know, Google and Facebook, etc., they are financing also Wikidata with the same goal from acquiring data from these systems. So again, we are working towards this much broader linked data-based internet, of cultural internet in a way, in many ways. So what we have been doing now for the last year or so, and new publications will start coming out soonish, is ERR is the Estonian public broadcaster. Typically, to, let's say, Eastern European small countries, quite poorly funded. And hence also they are struggling with exactly the problems that I already mentioned, that they have, that their MAM, or the media asset management system, is built on a proprietary system where it's difficult to get data out from, but actually includes a lot of data about Estonia's public sphere, its history over the last more than 20 years. Actually I'm lying now here, 18 years. Actually starting from the 1950s, but data is really systematic for the last 18 years. And so what we have been doing firstly is to analyze that MAM data in terms of makers of the programs, their contents, and of course we integrate their viewing data as well from the sociological companies, Kantar Emor more specifically, where we try to understand what is the kind of social dynamics of creating content that is of value to the society. We measure value in cultural diversity, the diversities of various kinds, as well as, of course, the popularity among the audiences. And so we, in many ways, are doing this kind of complex data science in terms of, contextualism or interrelating different kinds of measures. But what we also have started to do now is taking all of the ERR content and analyzing that content using some machine learning algorithms, recognizing entities and doing topic modeling, and then turning these entities and topics, etc., turning them over to the RDF-based linked data system so that to possibly analyze Estonia's public sphere history in possibly novel methods as networks. And so we can interrelate to these public sphere dynamics and the sort of, let's say, cultural industry dynamics, how programs have been created, to understand how value is being created and how this possibly has been affecting in shaping the Estonia's public share over basically 2 decades. This is not, we are not only doing analytic work, but our project is in many ways interventionist in a sense that we are, the aim is to publish all these data sets, hopefully ERR continues to agree with that, as open data, so that to turn public service institutions more accountable to really understand to everybody to carry out analysis how the value has been created by the public service media. So effectively, this is what we do in this project. Just to reiterate, we analyze how value is being created in networks of people and institutions, and then build open data systems about these networks that could be useful for many. And if they are open and can be analyzed in terms of value creation, then possibly intervene also to the public culture policy making processes, because they have better insights how public value therein has been created over the years. Now, the blockchain part. So effectively, what I've been trying to describe or analyze or basically recognize is how this decentralized network of data in the form of linked data contributed by multiple organizations across the world, public and private, how this maybe is emerging. I may be wrong, but this is what we tend to see. But of course the problematization is here that who can add links, who owns the data. Of course, when it comes to audiovisual archives, audiovisual assets typically tend to have value. Those who own them tend to be very restrictive and controlling when it comes to their assets. So it is difficult, therefore, this opening up of such databases. Thus, we have been interested in what is the potential of blockchain, because ownership can be declared there. Blockchains effectively are immutable records. Only those who have created records can later change them. And yeah, effectively they enable immutable identifications, timestamping, and so on. And of course, the expectation is here that these networks are decentralized. They are not controlled by any one big party. Of course, this can be easily disputed if you look at some of the main blockchain networks, but and of course, this is an issue. Now, but of course, and you probably know this as well as I do, so the kind of the promise, what gets people excited is that the content ecosystem, cultural content ecosystems that blockchain could enable are these intermediary-free systems. People tend to talk about, instead of platforms, we are having ecosystems where there's no party that really runs the platform, so to speak. Where the business models are not about kind of rent seeking, so the platforms that are being established based on the network effects, that are then in a good position to run surveillance systems, to collect data, and then basically rent out against money those contacts or data. And so we necessarily don't need these in the Web3 sort of blockchain-based systems, and can build content ecosystems based on different kinds of reward systems than surveillance and advertising sales, contact sales. So, and of course, the argument goes here that they could be possibly fairer to the actual creators, so systems that are more focused on creating new content, rewarding content creators directly, and not so much simply the platforms. Of course, this is only the kind of promise. There's a lot of hype around that promise, but at least theoretically, the potential is there. And there are, of course, around the world, many efforts that work towards these goals. As part of that, our research project, we have been actually studying several of those YouTube alternatives to understand how the kind of token economics works and why people are joining these platforms, and if these reward systems work, is there potential for work, etc. Of course, the reality is complex. Many of these platforms are for many kinds of conspiracy theories, but at the same time, we do see that people value the community aspect, the disintermediation, which kind of talks about some potentiality. So of course the risk is financialization. If everything is token-based, there are the typical risk of financialization that tokens can be also hoarded. They tend to also lead to monopolies. But of course, I am 50% media, as I said, media innovation scholar. I do innovation economics. I'm a 50% an innovation economist. These kind of critiques of financialization are all valid, but they are building on the, so to speak, neoclassical economics, which is the kind of dominant form of microeconomics. And if we could build on different kinds of economic theories, such as evolutionary economics, which is the core innovation theory, or institutional economics, or heterodox economics, or behavioral economics, then we could see that these kinds of technologies as facilitating communities. Also, yes, there are tokens, but what we are talking about is kind of so to speak, transactional communities that are also theorized. So we could see that these technologies instead are facilitating, so to speak, are good for facilitating cultural communities and different value systems. As money, different tokens, different monies are also representing potential different value systems. So, and of course, the aspect about blockchain is what we are mainly talking about here in this context are public value, because they are public blockchains. So people who run these public blockchains tend to have, so to speak, public roles, and hence you could theorize those public blockchains and cultural communities that build on top of that as working towards some form of, so to speak, public value. Now, tend to run out of time already. I start to run out of time. So what we have been studying as case studies also in our past part of our project is two different initiatives. I can tell you there's actually many more around when it comes to different creative industries, especially music and film. And we have two case studies when it comes to each of these cultural spheres. So White Rabbit is a startup, a kind of international startup, but mostly operating across Europe, that is creating kind of public registry for film rights. And this means that each filmmaker, film production company that owns some of the rights, can operate that data themselves, and then and the system then enables kind of watching films wherever they are, and then rewards going back to the original creators, so without platform intermediation. But of course, this White Rabbit is effectively using various kind of, so to speak, oracles to connect to the data all around, and of course they are linking to these linked data sets that I already described about those films and how they are interlinked, and filmmakers and so on. Now, Antiguity City is another project. Actually, here it's an international team, but the company is registered here in Estonia, where they are kind of in collaboration with Estonian public authorities, building this kind of blockchain-ready music rights data, rights system, which again could enable different new kinds of market operations, such as micropayments for music rights, etc. I'm not going to go into too much into this right now, but the Estonian case, the Digi City case, kind of tells that public authorities are interested in a way of a new public function of together with the private institutions and decentralized blockchains to run these kinds of new kinds of international registries as a market kind of coordination operation. So we are talking about this kind of public-private market coordination system emerging. Now, and I want to finish up with kind of telling you about Ontochain. Hands up who know about Ontochain. Nobody. And then my talk had some value. Ontochain is effectively a new initiative that kind of tries to really work towards integrating, converging these two main broad platforms, which is the semantic web and blockchain. It's an European initiative. It builds on the next generation initiative of the European Union, which is all about kind of building on these emerging linked data sets and using blockchain, underlying blockchain technologies for that infrastructure of immutable records, etc. So, effectively, this is what our project is also about, trying to work out how to integrate these technologies so that you empower cultural industries and especially empower them towards more of public value creation. And public value, it's a philosophically complicated term, of course, but let's just say open data sets that are where the information is available to many, and the information can be used and reused for building new knowledge and new kinds of products and services. So, and I was thinking yesterday, what's the relevance here for the heritage sector? Because I have to admit, I haven't systematically thought about it up until now. And maybe it is that when we are talking about digitization of heritage, etc., and maybe and here in Estonia, we certainly have started to discuss that, now when digitization has been happening and maybe in some areas is already finished. So next step is the usability access is one topic, but the other topic is what to do with all that data. How can it be used for analysis? And it's not just about that, but it's about how you publish data. You should publish it as much in a link format as is possible, and it's about effectively how you link with other data sets. It is effectively about perhaps the term of decentralization matters. So we are should move away from central institutions controlling all of it. And the blockchain technologies comes the question of how data is being renewed, who has the right to renew those global interlinked data sets. And of course, really the question is how public value can be created in this process. very abstract. I'm sorry, but this is where my thought process is at this moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Indrek, for this glimpse into the things to come. Blockchains, digital wallets is something that you didn't mention. That's a useful and neat way of keeping track of your rights to content that you have created. Lots of these experiments happening around Europe right now. There's a question that's come in online. Intermediary-free content ecosystems. Have you already taken steps to try it out? Is the DigiCity a project in that direction?
DigiCity is actually only very kind of layer 1 technology, but layer 0 technology in many ways. But yes, we are observing in our project also those, as I said, projects such as DigiCity, but especially White Rabbit. But also we are actually exploring. In my history, I've been also transmedia and cross-media researcher, and we are exploring those building of these cross-media worlds where participation-based fans can own part of the project as kind of participants as well as investors, and this kind of investment-like relationship creates a new kind of intimacy, new kinds of involvement, which in terms of their potential are interesting. Of course, there are all sorts of risks as well, but at least we are observing those. And yes, personally, I'm also invested in some of the projects.
That's admissions. There's a question from Twitch there. The microphone is coming. In the meantime, I'll ask you to clarify this question, the blockchains and the carbon footprint. Is it necessary to mine and calculate new crypto every time? There are lots of different types of blockchains around these days. So.
Okay. Let's use this avenue to explain that the carbon footprint issue is mainly only two existing blockchain networks, which is the Bitcoin and Ethereum currently, that work on a, so to speak, proof of work concept, where the mining is essential element there. All other blockchains are using various kinds of other proof systems, such as proof of stake or various kinds of proofs, where the carbon footprint is really, really insignificant. I just calculated the other day that Cardano, which is one of the biggest networks, has something like 0.0 something of the carbon footprint of Facebook, for instance. So it's really, we are talking about website level things.
Yeah, and the length of time that it takes to create a transaction in the new ledger is also considerably less than in Bitcoin, for example. So we have a question here.
Yeah, hi Indrek. Thank you very much for your presentation. Really interesting and great that you already have so many publications in your new project website. I'll be looking at those. I have a couple of questions. And so first of all, you proposed this blockchain as one of the new value generation, bottom up, this and the other. First question, do you think that such way of accessing knowledge or accessing content or engaging with content can tackle or counteract these superstar or network effects, long tail sort of thing? We know that minute percentage of the museum collections are, but also film and all the rest of the creative industry's context is actually used. What happens with all the rest? The promise of the semantic, will we have access to the long tail, but that's really not the case with network effects. So that's one part of the question. And the other question is, considering museums in this new environment and in this new context, do you see the museums playing with the blockchains? We see some museums are selling digital copies as NFTs, etc. Or do you see perhaps any room for an alternative sort of model, which is what we've been talking a little bit earlier and presented by Estonia and others, Agnes, how maybe creating a new commons value framework? And the question there is, if we are co-creating, what could be then the new co-ownership model? And do you have any ideas on that?
Well, your questions are of course hard. and it was long. When we are talking about blockchain, of course, the term is extremely general. So it could mean anything, really. So digital ledgers are as old as humanity. So digital ledgers just effectively enable arguably also permissionless access by many. And if you have access to information, that's already a good thing. So the question is about the ownership, I guess. And of course, I don't know what the answer is, but of course there is, let's just say right now, interesting potential when it comes to the convergence of the classical format of corporations, of co-ownership, and of course what the blockchain technology enables, the decentralized autonomous organizations. So what does that mean to the commons? Now, yeah, commons to an extent can be based on corporations, so co-ops. But let's just say that this is just an interesting potential to explore, and this is what we're doing. But of course, I cannot answer your question. It's yeah.
Okay, thank you. We don't have time for more questions at this point, so
yeah.
Thank you, Indrek.
Yeah, unfortunately.